Hi everybody, welcome back to engVid.com. I'm Adam. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the IELTS exam, so I may speak a little bit faster to help those of you preparing for the exam get a bit of listening practice as well. What I want to look at today specifically is the speaking section of the IELTS exam, and I want to talk about how this particular section of the test is scored. Because a lot of people, when they're preparing for the exam, they're only thinking about like vocabulary and grammar, and they're trying to practice just answering questions they have on like practice tests and all that stuff. But a lot of people forget to understand or to try to understand what examiners are listening for and how they're creating your score. So it's very important to understand the elements of the scoring, and there are four criteria, four elements of scoring for the speaking section of the IELTS exam. One is fluency and coherence, and I'm going to talk about each one individually in a moment. Two is lexical resource. So this is basically how you put everything together and how quickly you answer and all that. Lexical resource, vocabulary. Grammatical range and accuracy, grammar, and how you construct your sentences. And of course, pronunciation. And this is the most misunderstood one, and that's why I'll talk about that last. Now, before I get into that, it's also very important to remember, when the examiners are listening to you, when you finish your test, like let's say 12, 15 minutes later, they already have your score. Sure, somebody else will listen to the recording because they're recording you while you're giving your answers, but they already have your score understood. Now, are they going through each category, like checking things off as they go? No. In fact, they're not writing anything. They may make a few notes here and there, but they don't have a list of points that they're scoring you on. What they're doing is they are scoring you holistically. And this is a very important word to remember. Holistic. What they're doing is they're marking you based on the whole, not the individual parts. So they'll give you a whole score, and then later they will assign scores for each category based on what they heard and why they gave you the holistic score. So in other words, the bottom line is the basic thing you have to remember. All of these things work together. So if you're making lexical resource mistakes, like if you're using the wrong vocabulary or you're forcing some vocabulary in, this will affect your coherence. It may also affect your fluency. If you're not using the correct part of speech for the vocabulary, you have a good word, but you're not exactly sure how to form it. Do you need an adjective? Do you need a verb in this particular case? That's going to affect your GRA score. And of course, pronunciation. They have to understand what you're saying first. Okay, so let's look at each of these categories in more detail, and then you'll understand how they all work together. Okay, so let's start with the first criterion, fluency and coherence. Now, these are sort of related, but also quite separate. Let's start with fluency. When they talk about fluency on the IELTS exam, there are two things you need to consider: speed and duration. In terms of speed, what they're testing is how quickly do you answer the question, right? Because the quicker you answer it, the more clear it is that you understood the question and you're already thinking in English. If you're very slow or very hesitant in answering the question, the examiner might think that you are translating the question in your mind, looking for the words to answer, and then coming out with an answer, right? So fluency is about speed, how quickly you do it, because the more fluent you are with the language, the less time you need to make that translation. It means you're already thinking in the language you're using. And duration means how long you're talking for. So first of all, right away, one word answers will lose you points. Make sure that you expand everything. Make sure you have full sentences. For example, do you like swimming? Yes is not a good answer. Yes is not a good answer. Do you like swimming? Yeah, sure, I like swimming, especially in the summertime because I live near the sea and I can go swimming with the waves. Great answer. Why? Because A, you gave a few details, and B, you actually built a full answer instead of just saying one word that doesn't actually show whether you're fluent or not. In terms of coherence, this is very similar to the writing section, the coherence and cohesion part. Coherence, you have to make sure that ideas are connected. So in terms of the speaking, this includes both coherence and cohesion. How do your ideas flow? Are your answers well organized? Are you making a clear description of your thoughts, your feelings, your reasonings, your arguments, etc.? Make sure that you're using the correct connection devices, transitions or linking terms, conjunctions, pronouns, and so on. So basically, do it fast, extend it, and make sure that everything works together to give a complete answer. And that's what they're checking for in this criterion, okay? Let's look at one other thing I want to mention here. There are 3 parts to the speaking test. Parts 1 and 3 are direct questions. Parts 1 is just short questions, short answers, random everyday topics. Part 3 is a more focused topic and more extensive questions and therefore more extensive answers. And by extensive, I mean a little bit deeper discussion of whatever the topic is. So for example, part 1, do you prefer to write in pen or pencil? Right? So that's one thing. Now, a quick little tip about fluency. If you don't really have ideas about how to answer, start by rephrasing the question. Don't repeat the question because that shows you're taking time to translate. Rephrase it, paraphrase it. So do you prefer pens or pencils? Oh, my preference for writing tools would be pencils. So while you're making that paraphrase, you have time to think about why you chose pencils and then give more examples. So in other words, parts 1 and 3, what you want to do in terms of fluency and coherence, don't try to give an essay answer. Think about the essay, but think only thesis and examples. Thesis means answer the question directly, answer the question, and then go right away to give your support. Like, why do you prefer pencils? Because they're easier to erase if you make mistakes. Boom, done. Next question. And again, the more you speak, the less they speak. So you want to extend these answers. Part 2, on the other hand, they're going to give you that card and they're going to give you a few questions on a topic. And you have 1 minute to prepare to create an answer to answer all of these little questions. This one, think of like a mini essay. Have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, right? So lead into the topic, get into all the detailed questions, and then close it off to give the listener, the examiner, an idea that you're done. And that's how you're going to get the high fluency and coherence score, okay? Okay, so now we're going to look at lexical resource, which is, again, vocabulary, and grammatical range and accuracy, which, again, is the grammar. So what we're looking at is the mechanics of the language. And this is, again, same as writing section. A lot of people focus too much on these categories, on these criteria, and they think that because it's an English exam, it's all about the English. It's all about vocab and grammar. But remember, it's an English exam in terms of English for communication. Always remember that this is an exam of your ability to communicate, not your ability to memorize English textbooks or vocabulary lists, etc. So the main things you want to keep in mind here, and it's the same as the writing section, make sure you have a good variety of not only vocabulary, but also grammar. So in other words, don't use the same word often if you can help it, if there are clear synonyms. For example, if you're going to use the word parents, sure, you're going to use parents a few times because it's better than saying mother and father, mother and father, mother and father so many times. Parents doesn't have any other synonyms, so use it. But any other word that has plenty of synonyms, try to use those as well. And in terms of the grammar, don't use only adjective clauses. Blah, 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 which, blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 which, blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 that, blah, blah, blah. Those don't only use one type of clause. Try to have a variety of different sentence structures. Try to use inversion. Try to use the subjunctive, the causative, all kinds of different things, which will also help your complexity. Now, complexity in terms of grammar means not using only simple sentences. Make sure you have some compound sentences, some complex sentences. Make sure you have some irregular structures and all of this stuff as well. And in terms of vocabulary, it's not the complexity doesn't mean big words that you found in some academic word list. Complexity means using the right word for the right context or the right situation. And as much as possible, use secondary meanings of words. So for example, everybody knows the word shoulder. This is my shoulder. But not many people who are taking this exam know that shoulder is also a verb, which means to basically carry or hold something heavy like responsibility. So if I'm the oldest in my family, the oldest child in my family, I shoulder the responsibility of caring after my elderly parents, for example, right? Try to use secondary meanings. Usage. And I've seen this so many times. People are trying to impress with their big words, and they don't realize that the way they are using this particular word doesn't actually work in terms of what they're trying to say. If you're not 100% sure of the meaning and usage of a word, don't use it. And certainly don't memorize lists. And the same thing goes with accuracy. Accuracy in terms of both grammar and vocab, and again, usage in terms of both grammar and vocab, means using it very correctly for the situation it is in. Sometimes you're using the right word, you're not using it in the right form, for example, like the part of speech. Or sometimes you have, the word is somewhat related to your topic, but it doesn't fit the sentence you're trying to use it in, right? So be very careful about that, which also all comes together to natural use. And it's very, very important that everybody understands. Examiners know when you've memorized words, when you've memorized expressions, when you've memorized a sentence structure. I've seen so many times and I've heard so many times, especially for some reason, people always try to force in the not only blah, 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 but something blah, blah, blah. That inverted sentence. For some reason, people think it's going to get them extra points. If it has a use in what you're saying, use it. If you're putting it in there just to put it in there, the examiners will know this and you will actually lose points, not gain points. Make sure you're using things naturally. And if natural use means being simple, then be simple. Better to be simple and correct than trying to force language in and not making any sense at all, and your whole answer falls apart and your whole test falls apart. Keep that in mind, okay? So that's these two. Let's look at the last one, pronunciation, which is everybody's most feared criterion. Okay, so now we're going to look at pronunciation. Now, the first thing that I have to make very, very clear to you is that pronunciation does not mean accent. Pronunciation is one thing, your accent is another thing. First of all, you're not going to lose your accent before the exam. You will probably not lose your accent after the exam, or ever for most people. If you're starting to learn English and speak English at an older age, you will probably always have some accent from your mother tongue. So don't worry about your accent. Pronunciation means saying words in a way that I or the examiner can understand what you're saying, right? So the key is to be understood, not to sound like a native speaker of whatever country you're in, right? For example, the word height. If you say hate, then in the context of the sentence, depending on the sentence, I might not understand the whole sentence because you mispronounced one word. If you say hate, right away I know that you don't actually know this word. You saw it somewhere and you're saying it like it looks. You don't actually know what this word is. So again, make sure that you're saying the words the way they're supposed to be said. That's one part of it. The other part is the use of certain techniques. They want to know that you can speak not necessarily like a native speaker, but that you at least are aware of the things that native speakers do. And you probably do in your own language, in your mother tongue. So for example, things like elision or assimilation. So for example, you don't say black coffee. You say black coffee. You drop that first CK. And you don't say at it. You say at it. You blend that consonant and vowel. These are all parts of the pronunciation. So there's pronunciation for individual words, and then there's pronunciation for words in a sentence, how they work together. This is what they're testing you in terms of the scoring. And this is what you have to pay a little bit of attention to. So now, when you're preparing to take the exam, when you're doing your practice at home, it's very, very important that you record yourself, right? Record yourself. Like just take an article, take a paragraph from a newspaper article and just read it out loud while recording yourself. Ideally, if you can find someone speaking, like a native speaker, speaking in English, and you have a transcript, watch it, listen, read along with the transcript, and then record yourself reading the transcript. And then compare your speaking to the native speakers. Now, you're not going to be like the native speaker, but you can figure out where you're making pronunciation mistakes in terms of how a word is spoken or stressed or enunciated, etc. Those are the things you can do to help yourself practice because the examiners are listening for it. So now, going back to that whole idea of holistic scoring, if you can't say this word, you're already losing a pronunciation point, possibly. If because you can't say this word, I don't understand that sentence that you used it in, then you're already losing like fluency and coherence score because I'm not actually sure what you're saying. And I'm not sure if you're like got caught translating, etc. And because I don't get the word, maybe you put the wrong word in there. So your lexical resource score and your grammar score all go down because that sentence doesn't work mechanically, structurally. So this one mistake can cost you points in all the criteria, right? And that's what holistic reading is. So don't focus on any one score. And another thing to remember, all 4 criteria are worth a complete score. Each one is worth 25%. So pronunciation is as important as lexical resource. Both are as important as fluency and etc. Every category, every criterion is equal. Make sure you're focusing on the whole package, not just 1 or 2, not just grammar, just vocabulary. Okay? It's a communications test. Make sure you can communicate. Okay? So that's basically all you need to know here. If you have any questions, please go to engvid.com and you can ask in the comment section there. And there is a quiz. Go take the quiz, review all of this information, make sure you're ready for the IELTS speaking test. Okay? Now, if you like this video, give me a like. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and come back next time. I'll give you some more IELTS tips and TOEFL tips and general English tips to help you improve. See you then. Bye-bye.